יתגד אבי קדש מרבה בעמדי וקיותי במליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ואחריכו בישראל בגלה בזמן קריב עמו אמן יש ברוך ולמלמל מיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמר קדושה בריחו לעילא מן כה ברכתה ושירתה תושבתה ונחמתה דרמן בעמה ועמו Amen.
Beginning 223. The petition of Amidah begins on page 223, ranking to Kedusha 225.
Adonai Svatai Tivtach Ufi Yagid Tehillatach Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Eloavotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzhak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor HaNorah Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim V'konei HaKol V'zocher Chasdei Avod U'mivii Goel Livnei B'neim L'man Shemo V'yavah Melech Ozer V'Kedem Moshiach Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Aram V'Getzorah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechem et Avrav L'Hoshia Mashiv Haruch Meridah Gashem Mechalkel Chaim V'Chesed Mechem Tibarachim Rabim Mesomech Noflim V'Ofel Cholim V'Matir Asurim Mekayim Anatol Ishanevar Michamocha Bagu V'Vod U'Mido Melach Melech Memidon Chayim Atzmich Yeshua V'Ne'eman Atal HaChayot Meitim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayei HaMeitim Mikadesh et Shemcha Ba'olam Geshem Shemakdishim V'Ro B'Shmei Marom V'Kakatuv Al Yad Nevi'echa V'Kara Zeh El Zeh V'Amar Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech haaretz kvodo, L'matam Baruch Yameru. Baruch kevod Adonai mimkamov, Divrei kodesh katuv lemor. Yimelech Adonai le'olam, Melech ha'etzion, L'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. L'dor v'ador nagigod lecha, L'netzah netzim kedushatcha nakdish, V'shivracha Eloheinu, Mibino emush le'olam va'ed, Ki Melech gadol v'kadosh ata, Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. אתה אחד ושמך אחד, מכאן חסר כל אחד בארץ, תפארת גדולה, ועטרת ישועה, יום מנוחה, וקודשי לעמך ונתת. אברהם יגר, יצחק ירנן, יעקב ובניו ינוחו בו, מנוחת אהבה ונדבה, מנוחת אמת ואמונה, מנוחת שלום ושלווה השקט והבטח, מנוחה שלמה שאתה רוצה בה. יכירו בניך וידעו כי איתך היא מנוחתם, ועל מנוחתם יקדישו את שמך. אלוהינו ולאבותינו בצווים מנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך, וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה ורצון שבת קודשך, ואנוכו בם ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. ויצא אדוני אלוהינו במחסו את תפילתם, והשבת אדוני בביתך תפילתם ואהבת ברצון, ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים. ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון, מודים אנחנו לך. הטוב כאילו חלו רחמך, והרחם כאילו תמו חסדך, מעולם קיווינו לך. ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו, תמיד לעולם ועד. וכל ילמדוך סלע, ויהללו את שמך באמת, האל שתנו רצותנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב שמך לחנן להודות. שלום רב ישראל, עמך והקודש ותבל תשים לעולם. כי אתה מלך, אדון לכל השלום, וטוב בעיניך. לברך דמך ישראל בכל עת וכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום. צדקתך צדק לעולם, ותורתך אמת, וצדקתך אלוהים עד מרום. אשר עשית גדולות, אלוהים מי כמוך, צדקתך כרעל, משפטך תהום רבה. אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני. יתקדש ויקדש ברבה, ברמה תברכי ותמליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון רחתך בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב עמו, אמן. יש ברבה ברך לעולם ולמלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתברך ויתברך וינצח ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שברגו דשא בריחו, לעילה מן כה ברכתה בשירתה, תושבתה ונחמתה דרון בעלמה עמו, אמן. תתקבל צלחון וברכון לכל ישראל, קדם ונשמע ועמו, אמן. יהי שלום רב מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל ישראל ועמו, אמן. עושה שלום עממה, והוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל ישראל ועמו, אמן. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל. ככתוב בתורתך אדוני מלך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון וביומי חון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
Talk to Alan for leading and to Marshall for laning. Those in the room are going to go get some Sudash sheet. So those on Zoom, give us, 7 or 8 minutes. Go get some food, get some leftover cholent, some bagels and some vegetables if you have them, so we can have the shared experience. And we'll see you for learning in about 7 or 8 minutes.
Oh, yeah, 2 months, every 2 months. But I got it, till I work out with it at the gym, it's in a 6-month schedule. So I tell them, they're threatening to bring in their scissors.
You gotta lots, huh?
He's going to be home next month. He's going to spend some time in Florida with his friends and family. I'm in New York, Florida. Then he's going to come back and spend time with his friends in St. Louis for Purim. Then he's going to be back here for a week. Which will be the next.
I'll be there for Pesach.
He'll be there for Pesach.
Do you have any Pesach training?
Well, yes, he'll be with the Chabad rabbi there. I told you.
Is he in the city?
He is not in the city. He is an hour outside. He's in a small town, an hour's drive from St. Louis.
Her favorite word that
He will go there
don't
for a
deserve
save.
spanking, she's doing it for love.
That's,
So I remember this one time I used to go to her house,
and
she used to play Scrabble. And she used to have a cheat, like she had in the cheat dictionary, like whatever you don't, yeah. Because my brother had the cheat thing, and I looked at her, I said, Grandma, shouldn't be cheating in Scrabble. And she said, I'm not cheating, yes you are. And then the other favorite memory I had was when
It was wonderful that
we played
after,
cards, we were playing poker, she taught me how to play poker.
after
So
all the
that was
food
like
I
the
had at
awesome
lunch,
memory of that,
I was
was when I
exhausted.
played poker.
I got home
She was like,
and decided
she taught me how to
I
play
need to
poker,
take
like,
a nap.
so I had to get the,
And it's always hard after you know, it's like, what better way to take a nap
She
than
looked at me, I said, Grandma, you cheated.
the Hamalei.
I won, 'cause I got
Although
royal
I've even
blood.
Zornberg
You
won
were
as well,
so
probably
funny.
faster.
Kierkegaard will also do it.
Yeah, but the great thing that I
My
realized,
grand-
and it's
My
something that I
grandmother
heard
played
of
Scrabble with cheat code.
that she was
She
talking
had
about.
cheat.
Wow.
When I like with chocolate, that was my favorite, Mrs.
Well,
Lee.
into the Shachar.
Even if you don't, she's just doing it
I heard
out.
about meditation with you. I get to hear it with meditation with Rabbi Sohn today.
She worked on that verse also.
Yes, it was wonderful with what the guy who died this century. He's very recent. The Hasidic guy. I can't remember his what? No. It's a guy. It's a Hasidic guy who died in 2000 something, which is remarkable. And I can't remember his name. The mayor, Slovid. Anyway,
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
he's got really good stuff. Really good stuff. But anyway, he was talking.
Nativot Shalom is the name.
Yes, Nitivot Shalom. That's right. And he was talked about that. It was a great learning, talking about the whole thing about the difference between lakach and to give, and how it was like really the soul that was all going to be there, that you, and it's Mishkan first and only there. It's excuse me, it's Mikdash only there and Mishkan everywhere else, because it's to bring the enemy. You have to take your energy up and become connected that way. But I understand why you want to do it, but we have to do some, it makes beautiful.
Stroke trainer. I took just a printout, as I'm walking here, I study it. I know every single crack in that sidewalk.
I'm sure you got it. You got it down pat. Huh? So, yeah.
It's a stretch.
We open up a,
Yeah, I mean,
compendium of Torah commentary, including Hasidic commentary. There are few verses that have as many different people trying to say something significant than they fully try. Something about that verse has just triggered everybody's curiosity.
Well, yeah, well, the difference, it's the only time that it's mentioned. You got, you talk about bringing gifts. It's not bringing gifts, it's taking gifts. It's you taking part of yourself so you can experience connections with God there. And I love all the different things they talk about. It says, where'd they get, dolphin skin?
Did you hold it back from the Holy One? Did the Holy One produce dolphin skin if you wanted to? If she wanted to? If they wanted to?
Everywhere we go, somewhere we go to.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, it's a great pasuk.
Yes, it is.
What? Yeah, she loved him.
You didn't see any knives over there, you don't see any knives over
He
there.
loves him and grandma.
oh no, I didn't know.
He loves to have his chocolates. He's always into the chocolates.
So I'm assuming we have dollars around 620-ish.
Yeah, 615, 620, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Maybe when we start finishing up.
Shalom.
Yes.
Shalom. Shabbat
Dinner
shalom.
party, yes. You want to go to a dinosaur?
You had her favorite memory I had of her?
Yeah.
Rabbi Zach, Clifton was at, when we were playing Scrabble, my grandma used to use that cheat code, where you can't think of a letter, but she used the cheat book, and I said, Grandma, you're cheating. She said, I'm not cheating. I said, yes, you are, you're using the dictionary. And she said, don't tell me what to do. And then she grabbed a cigarette, and she was like this. And she gave me a look. I said, come on, Grandma, if you're gonna be a cheater, then we're not gonna play. Then the other favorite memory was when we were playing poker. It was like the real casino deals. So she had the poker chips and the candy, how much we were betting. And my grandma's sitting there with a cigarette in her mouth like she's in Vegas. And she was like, I said, deal me in. And she has a cigarette in her mouth, she was stealing the card. And it was down to this, who's gonna win the game? So she put down her card, and it was a 2 pair. I said, Grandma, I'm gonna beat that royal flush.
That's
My grandma
that's a rare
was like
hand.
saying, "Did you cheated?" I said, she was like this on the table. She said, "You cheated." I said, Grandma, that's how the game works. Grandma was sure playing. She had a deck full of cards from every trip she went to. Poker chips, every hotel. That's my grandma. My grandmother was, that was my favorite memory.
My grandmother was into cards cards too. Remember in game one, my brother, when we played Rummy Cube,
Sure.
we play that too. My brother was really good.
I feel like we all learn cards from our grandparents.
Right.
Yep, and Scrabble.
And then I remember I heard even when I shared how I beat her badly in war. She called it a fight because I did a bad. It wasn't intentional fight. I just did a bad job shuffling the cards. Like all the higher cards, you all the lower cards. That's how it happens. People thought it was fun.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Hello, Zoomers. Hopefully you have the text sheet in front of you. Does anybody in the room not have a text sheet? There are extras up here. Okay. We're going to look at a verse from our Parsha, the opening verse, and then a verse from Dvarim. And my question for you, kind of like a Rorschach test, is if you had to connect these two verses, how would you? Okay. So the opening line of our Parsha, from which we get the name of the Parsha, God's telling Moses, V'ata titzaveh et b'nei Yisrael. You, Moses, titzaveh, from the root tzava, from which we get the word mitzvah. You're going to command et b'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel, v'yikchu elecha. So two verses, two parshas in a row begin with a commandment to the Israelites that they're doing some taking, right? They took stuff in the opening lines of Parshat Shuma, a gift to God. There's a sheet right in front of you. Okay, welcome. V'yikchu elecha, they should take to you, you meaning Moses, shemen zayit, the oil of olives, zach, pure, katit, beaten down, lama, or for illumination, laha'alot, ner tamid, in order to raise up the ner tamid. Okay, so this is the verse from which we get. The ner tamid is temporarily missing. Forgot that because we're mid-construction. But this is the verse which initially commanded the Israelites to put a eternal light at the altar, and that's why synagogues to this day have a ner tamid. Okay, that's beginning of Parshat Tetzaveh. Hold that thought, that image, and go to the second verse. This is Dvarim chapter 7, verse 3. And in context, this is Moses kind of recalling to the Israelites a series of laws that God gave them. And one of them is, Velo titchatein bam. You shall not marry yourselves with them. Bitcha lo titein livno. Your daughter you shall not give to his, meaning that nation's son. Uvito, and his daughter, lo tikach livnecha, and his daughter you shall not take for your son. So this is a standard core source for why Jews should participate in endogamy, marrying within the faith. Two verses, 3 books of the Torah apart, one about the eternal light in the tabernacle, one about keeping marriages inside the Jewish family. If you had to connect them, how would you connect them? Alan, we have some microphones on the table. There should be. So just one? There should have been more. Well, I only need one, so. Joey, do me a favor, take that microphone off the stand so it's easier to pass.
Okay. The pasuk in Exodus talks about pure oil, clear oil, beaten olives for lighting, and it talks about the purity of what's going to be there. It's not just taking regular oil, you have to refine it and make it pure. I think we're talking about not intermarriage, it's to keep the people of Israel pure in that same way. And it also makes it as ongoing to be eternal. You talk about a ner tamid for light, for the Jewish people to be eternal. You have to have Jews marrying Jews.
Okay, it's not just regular oil, it's oil that's been preserved and kept apart. And so too the Jewish people should retain a certain purity. We don't want to get into the conversation of racial purity, obviously, but a purity in terms of what we're transmitting to the next generation. And I like your connection that both of these is the best way for it to be a tamid, for it to be perpetuatable, for it to be able to be going perpetuity. Title?
So I have 2, and the first is how the custom of Upsherin came about, which is if you're talking about trees that you can't use the fruit for 3 years, One of the most precious trees is clearly an olive tree because it's 7 species. Light is something that distinguishes humans from other creatures, etc. And the reason for Upsherin is a child at 3 is likened to not trimming or using a tree at 3.
Okay, so
Which I liked better than Alan's pure focus on purity.
but how is that connected? Maybe I'm missing something titled to the second verse.
Because it's fruitfulness, it's the next generation, it's
Got it.
it's fertility.
Got it. So, even though we don't.
And Rabbi, one more thing, you're somehow your voice was very distinct until something happened with the microphone.
How about this? Is that better?
Much better.
So, even though we don't think of an olive as a fruit in terms of like, you know, in American culture, a fruit is a sweet thing. Technically, halakhically, an olive is a fruit. Fruit is fruitfulness and fertility. And the real reason why we don't want intermarriage is because we want the next generation to be fruitful in a Jewish way. Bobby?
Yeah, the word that stuck out at me, at least in the English, was the beating of the olives, because in order to have this continuity, you have the ravid, the chain, the door to door, generation to generation. It takes a lot of work, to grind the olives, to do that. If you want to have the pure oil and you want to have the continuity and the ner tamid, to keep going, it takes a lot of work. Whether you're a parent or you're a rabbi or you're a teacher, you have to work hard in order to instill all the right things, or to keep up with the daily grind of making sure that what needs to be done is done, so that you have what you need as the end product.
Lovely. There's a certain grinding pressure to produce something pure and valuable and worthy that's going to last. Good. 3 for 3, call it a vote, right? By the way, the exercise we just did, that really is the essence of Midrash. We read Midrash, but it's also possible to produce Midrash. What's Midrash? Stringing together associations between verses, and there were different subgenres of Midrash. One subgenre of Midrash called a petichta, which means kind of an opening, where the person writing the Midrash would start with another verse, not connected to the verse they were on, and if you imagine sitting in the yeshiva, 2,000 years ago, you're thinking, how is he, it was a he back then, going to bring it back to our verse? And eventually there's a circuitous route, and all of a sudden the verse that you were on becomes illuminated. So the reason why I had you connect these 2 verses, I could have done this exercise any 2 verses, is because one of the classic midrashim on Shemot Rabbah, on this verse in Exodus about the lighting of the lamp, actually brings us eventually to the second verse. And I want, now that you've come up with some of the ideas on your own, which are going to be actually evocative of what the Midrash says, let's actually read the Midrash. So this is Shemot Rabbah, chapter 36, number 1. On the phrase, V'ata titzaveh. And I want you to be aware, as you're reading this Midrash, a couple of things that may seem obvious, but they're worth highlighting. First of all, how immersed in the biblical text the rabbis of the Midrash were, how they knew and loved every single syllable, and they had almost instant recall, and their love affair with the flora and fauna of the land of Israel. We are very disconnected from fruits and vegetables and sand. We go to Ralph's and we pick and we get our clementines, right? We don't really know what it's like to produce it. By the way, that's one of the things was wonderful about the Zionist revolution, is that it brought the Jews back not only in contact with the land of Israel, but the flora and the fauna of the land of Israel, having to be the farmers that produce all of those 7 species, right? This material is written, whether it was written in the land of Israel or written in Babylonia with recent memory of toiling in the land of Israel, they're very intimately connected with all the species and aspects of the different fruits that for them said something about the experience of the Jewish people. Okay. So our verse. Something like, this is reminding me, or this is connected to that which is written in the book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, God says the following verse about the Jewish people. Zayit ra'anan yafeh. A beautiful and flourishing olive tree. To'ar kara Adonai shemecha. God has called your name, Israel, like that. So Jeremiah says, of the ways I can describe you, my people, I'm connecting you to a verdant olive tree. If you've ever been to, the Galilee, think of those beautiful, strong olive trees that are just like, dropping beautiful fruits all the time. The Midrash says, "V'chi lo nikru Yisrael ela zayat hazeh bilvad." Wait a second, who's writing this Midrash. You're reminded of a verse in Jeremiah, just because our verse talked about olives, right? Because that's the verse that we're commenting on. Just because Jeremiah said that the Jewish people can be connected to an olive tree, is that the only thing that the Jewish people were likened to? I, meaning the author of this Midrash, I have perfect recall of all the biblical verses, and I can give you many verses that describe Israel related to other fruits. Is it not the case that there are many kinds of beautiful and pleasant and praiseworthy trees that the Israelites were compared to? For instance, now we're going to go into a 5 or 6 example, for instance. The Geffen Ute'ena. I have a verse that connects the Jewish people to Geffen. What's Geffen?
Great.
Right? The vines. Ute'ena, figs.
Figs.
Nemar. We have a verse, chapter 80 of Tehillim. Geffen Mitzrayim Tasiya. That in the book of Tehillim, the author says, you transported a grapevine from Egypt. Who is the grapevine in the sentence? Us. Like you think Joseph, it could be Joseph in particular, but the Jewish people are like a beautiful grapevine in Egypt. You brought them out, and Te'ena, it says in the book of Hosea, Kivikura v'te'ena bereshita, that we are compared to, hi Danny, we're compared to the first fruit that ripens on a fig tree. So all of a sudden we've got, olive, we'll get to olive, but don't forget about grape, don't forget about fig. And speaking of more of the 7 species, kat tamar. Michelle, do you have a sheet?
I'm sharing.
Okay, I have an extra. In what way have we been compared to a tamar, a date tree? Shenemar, in the book of Song of Songs, Zot komatech damta l'tamar. This, the way you hold yourself, komatech, you're standing up. Damta is similar to like the verb gomet l'tamar. Okay, so far there are 3 different fruits that we've been compared to. How about erez? How about a cedar tree? Shenemar ke'erez
Lebanon
iskef. In that verse, it's not the people of Israel in entirety, it's the tzaddik, it's the righteous amongst us, are compared to a tall cedar tree in Lebanon. How about a nut tree? Ke'egoz, Shne'amar, back to Song of Songs. El ginat egoz yaradi. I descended into a garden of nut trees. And again, the Midrash assumes that the Song of Songs is a love poem between God and the Jewish people. So when God says he descended into a garden of nut trees to meet his beloved, who is the beloved? Us. Okay? So far, the Midrash says, you brought Jeremiah, you're reminded of Jeremiah, who compares this to the olive tree, because our verse that we're originally talking about from our Parsha is connected to the olive tree, but there are many, many fruits that we're connected to. Ukra'an b'chol minei shlachim. We've also been connected to all types of things that grow in a field. Shlachim are various growths in a field. Shenemar, back to Song of Songs. Shlachayich, pardes, rimonin, etc. Your irrigated fields, and again in the comparison, the you is the Jewish people. Your beautiful expanse has rimonim, pomegranates, and the Midrash doesn't quote the whole verse. If you go to the end of the verse, there are like 7 or 8 different random fruits that are represented there. Right? The Jewish people being thought of as a flowering, flourishing field. Uva Yirmiyahu Lamar, why does Jeremiah come? If Jeremiah, as it were, knew all these other texts, right? Some of the texts came after Jeremiah, but in Midrashic imagination, there's no Emukdamu Mukhar Torah, there's no chronology in the Bible. Why would he say, Zayat Ra'anan Yefei Pritoa? Why would he say that mostly God has compared us to a flourishing, beautiful olive tree? Okay. So all this has been a question, right? The question was, in our verse, this notion of the eternal light being connected or being illuminated by beaten olive oil. The author says, hey, that reminds me of Jeremiah, who compared the Jewish people to olive tree. And then the author himself saying, wait a second, there are many other things that we're compared to, so why would Jeremiah focus on that? Ella, ma hazayet hazeh. Just like this olive. Ad shehu b'ilano. It starts out happily on its tree. Migargarinoto. We pick it. V'achar kach moridim oto min hazayet. And then we bring it down from the tree. V'nechbad, and we beaten it, we flatten it. Umishochovtim oto ma'alinoto lagat. Once we've kind of flattened it, we bring it up into the olive press. V'nonin otan b'matchen, and we put it into the mill. V'achar kach tochaninoto, and then we grind it. V'achar kach makifinoto b'chablim, and then we surround it with all sorts of ropes. If you ever think of how an ancient olive press works, they're a series of very heavy stones, and also the olives placed between mats or reeds that when you press down upon it, the matter of the olive stays, but the oil drips out. Umevi'in avanim, you bring these heavy stones. V'achar kach nonin et shanan, and then they give their oil. That's how you make oil from olives. Tach Yisrael. It's very similar, the Jewish experience. Ba'in ovdei kochavim. Our enemies come. V'chovtim otem. And smack them down. Beat them like olives that cannot protect themselves. Mimakom lamakom. Moving us from place to place. V'chovshim otam. And press us. V'koftim otam. And force us. V'kolarin. And put us in chains. Umakifin otan tartutin. The great Aramaic Greek word. And surround us with fences, meaning enclose us so we can't escape, as if we are the olive. So what's the olive's experience in the process of making oil? Pressed, pushed down, constrained, forced, squeezed. Yacharkach osin shuva. What happens ideally to the Jewish people when we are treated so poorly? We ask ourselves, what have we done on some level to deserve this, right? This is not, there's a little bit in rabbinic theology of blaming the victim, as long as the victim that you're blaming is yourself, right? The Jewish people are supposed to ask themselves in moments of travail, what is God angry with us for? Because if God were not angry with us, then we wouldn't be experiencing this. So that should bring us to a process of tshuva. And tshuva here, the tshuva coming from us is like the oil coming from the olive. The only way it comes is through travail, through pressure, through inconvenience, to say the very least. V'akadosh baruch hu onelahem. And the Holy One answers them when they do tshuva. Minayin. How do we know that it's only in response to our doing tshuva, our recognizing that we're in such pain, that God will answer? Shnamar, as it says in the second chapter of Shmot, Vayinchu b'nei Israel v'chule, and the Israelites groaned out. Turn the page to the bottom of page 3, you get the whole verse. This is the verse in Parshat Shmot where God begins to respond to the Israelites in their oppression in Egypt. Vayhi bayimim harabim hahem. This is source. Doesn't say source number, but the bottom of page 3. It was on those days. Vayamot melech Mitzrayim. The king of Egypt died. The king that was oppressing them. Vayeyanchu b'nei Yisrael min avodah. The Israelites cried out from their heavy labor. Vayezaku. They moaned. Vata'al shavatam el Elohim. Their cry ascended up to heaven. Min avodah. From the very place that they were crying, it went up to God. So, back to our verse, bottom of page 2, that verse shows that it's once we cry and realize how much we're suffering, and the cry reaches up to God. And I think what's implicit in the verse is that in that crying, we actually are willing to do some change and involve ourselves in tshuva. Then God will respond. And then they quote another verse from the 4th chapter of Barim. You can look at that on the top of page 4. Batsar laka, when you're in surus, that word tsar, when you're in distress, umitzaucha kol hadvarim ha'ela, and all these awful things find you, ba'acharit ha'yamim, at the end of days, v'shavta Adonai alecha, you're going to do tshuva towards your God, v'shamata b'kolo, and listen to God's voice. And what will happen then? The el rachum Adonai, the softest aspect of God will be manifest. Lo yarpacha, will not let you fail. Lo yashchitecha, will not destroy you. Lo yishkach et brit avatecha, will not forget covenant with your ancestors. Asher nishba lehem, that he swore with them. So far, the Midrash, now go back to, go to the top of page 3, has done this circuitous route to say, yeah, if you survey biblical literature, there are many fruits that we're compared to. But primarily, we're compared to the olive. And why are we compared to the olive? Because it's only when we're under enormous pressure, when those millstones are on us, and we're so squeezed that we can't breathe, the purest liquid emerges from us. If you're an olive, the liquid is oil. If you're a Jew, the liquid is tshuva. The liquid is awareness of your part in bringing yourself back to a place of being high again. Okay? So far, what we read has nothing to do with the first question I asked you. Okay? But because I was going to bring you the next source, I wanted to bring you this source, the ways in which the rabbis are imagining, like they see a fruit. When I see a fruit, I want to eat it. The rabbis of the ancient world saw fruits of the land of Israel. They tried to connect that to the Jewish experience. Okay, now to the top of page 3. Devar acher. Here's another way of responding to this verse about olives. Ma ra'a Yirmiyahu lishol Avinu Israel. What did Jeremiah see such that it made sense to compare our ancestors to the olive tree? Ella, kol hamash'in mit'arvin ze bazeh. All liquids mix. You pour orange juice into Coca-Cola and you mix it, it becomes some disgusting concoction, but you can no longer tell where the orange juice ends and the Coca-Cola begins. And pretty much any other liquid. And by the way, we're scientific people living in a scientific generation, so we know something about the viscosity of oil, and so it makes sense to us scientifically. But go back thousands of years, and you're just getting used to the world, and you have liquids, and most liquids form together, and all of a sudden there's one liquid that's pretty prevalent called olive oil, and you pour it in other things, and it's still the olive oil, right? And before you had scientific equations to explain that, your reaction to it was, whoa, there's some wonder there. Like, why does that happen? And what is it about the olive that produces that? And how can it be connected to Jewish people? The olive oil does not mix together. Rather, it stands. And if you ask yourself, by the way, yes, that's true of olive oil, but it's true of all other oils. Most of the oil that they knew was olive oil. That was their primary source of oil. So yes, there's safflower oil will do that too. They didn't have safflower oil. Kach Yisrael einam mitarvin im havdei kochavim. Similarly, the Jewish people, even if you pour them amongst the idolaters, pour them amongst the non-Jews, they're not going to mix in. Now, what's interesting to ask is, are the rabbis saying that they shouldn't mix in, or that they physically will not, or watch out if you do? Is this prescriptive or descriptive? Is it you better not, or is it no matter how much you try to assimilate a Jew into a non-Jewish culture, it's just not going to work? Brings a proof text, Shenemar, as it says, this is the second verse that I asked you to look at, V'lo titchatein bam. You shall not marry with them. If I pause here, do you think the rabbis were giving that teaching prescriptively or descriptively? Is it warning the Israelites not to mix in because, by the way, like those two things don't mix? Or is it saying there's something unique, this gets to be a little bit jingoistic, there's something unique about the Jewish experience, and no matter what happens, if you pour us into a foreign substance, we're going to retain a certain unique identity. What do you think, Alan?
I think that prior to this point, it was more descriptive. That is, Israel does not intermingle. But yet the proof text that they take is really more prescriptive. Don't intermarry. It's viewed as the commandment.
Yeah, so remember that when we look at the final text, will be the spot, and that read something in the grammar of the Lo Titchatein Bam that hovers on the line between a thou shalt not and it actually can't happen. So remember that. AJ, I see your hand.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, the mic in front of you is not working. You're being picked up by the other mic.
Right.
So when you speak to the room, yeah, it's not working at all. But when you speak to the room, it's being picked up by the other mics. You're faint. But the paper rustling next to that mic is being picked up wonderfully well. Regarding the issue with the rabbis, and are they being prescriptive or descriptive? In general, if they're being descriptive, they're being wishful. It's indulging in wishful thinking, because obviously Jews, call it intermarrying if you wish, without rabbinic blessing. I don't know, but obviously it happened quite a bit throughout history. But in general, it's also true and descriptive that groups seek out like kind, especially if they're to promote similar behaviors to make things easier and more efficient. And if you are doing services, etc., or following certain holidays and following a certain calendar, it's just easier if you're together and you know each other already, and there's a level of trust there. So
Great.
a
And
little bit of both.
is this better, Mike? Is this microphone better?
Yes, it
Okay.
is much
Great.
better.
So I think you're right. It's a little bit of both. Let's just linger on this a second before we go to the last source. Jewish parents who want their children to marry inside the faith, and rabbis who try to create a community where the next generation will be Jewish, sometimes engage in a lot of tisk-tisking, right? Lo titchatein bam. You're only allowed to marry inside the faith. It's probably a good principle to have in a system that you want to maintain somewhat insularly, to have certain prohibitions to keep people out. But it's not really the most effective tool. The most effective tool, I believe, in ensuring that you have another generation of Jews is to raise a child so deeply immersed in what it means to be Jewish that he or she will feel properly inorganic when bringing someone in from a different culture, right? Who's not, if someone wants to convert, that's a different story, but someone from a different culture with different norms, they should experience that oil and water. Not better, not worse, right? This is not a suggestion of our identity or our blood or our genes as being superior, but being something worth preserving, something that has a certain internal coherence, right? If someone goes off to college and hears the voice of their teacher or their rabbi, their parents saying, you shouldn't do this, they're going to probably go do it. But if someone goes off to college and realizes they're most at home amongst other people who are similar to them in that they're olive oil, and when they try to integrate into other into other aspects of the culture, they feel a little bit of that oil and water separation, that's a good thing. Right? On some level. Now, we are experiencing in the modern 20th, 21st century America, a level of assimilation and acceptance into the wider society, the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7th notwithstanding, that our ancestors really couldn't have imagined, right? In the beginning of the Enlightenment, right, the Jews who were the Jewish leaders, the Jewish Enlightenment who basically said, be a Jew in your home and a Frenchman on the street, they were fantasizing about an era in which a Jew could mix, a Jewish Frenchman could just mix in amongst the French and be French. And a Jewish German could mix in amongst the Germans and be German. And it happened on some level. And at some point it happened so much that the oil and the water mixed. And it was hard to make the argument, well, why should I separate it out again? If someone doesn't have a certain unique sense of their own identity, it sounds very old-fashioned and archaic to say you should forcibly remove the oil from the water when they don't even recognize the distinction between the oil and the water, right? So it looks like it's a thou shalt not. Culturally and pedagogically, it's really a understand what is beautiful about just being amongst oil. And no matter how much you put oil into another liquid and mix and mix and mix, you should be aware of the boundaries. Now look at the fifth source. Hasidic commentary of Rabbi Yehuda Altaleb of Ger, 19th, 20th century Poland. His worldview is not ours. And some of the ways in which Hasidic texts railed against assimilated communities like ours is very painful to read. Some of it is right on. Some of it is aware of how an insular society is best poised to pass on its values to the next generation, right? And we're going to fight it in our minds because we are happily living, fully connected to the wider secular world in which we live. And yet there's something to this that I think is worth raising up. Look what he says. Yisrael mechunan betchunat nefesh kazo. The Jewish people has a certain, mechunan is hard to translate here. They're talented, they are uniquely described, something like that. The verb lechanein can mean a lot of different things. With this tchunat nefesh, this, I translate it as character trait. It's really the trait of the soul. The Jewish people have a certain uniqueness here. Tiv'am hukach. It is our nature that she'enam yecholim. We are not able lihit arev im ha'umot, to mix in with the other nations. Remember what anti-Semites have said about us throughout the ages. Remember what Haman said about they're unique and they're spread out, right? And they don't mix in with us. Part of our reaction to that is say, how dare you say that? The Sfat Emet is saying, yeah, on some level, the way we have created our society and our identity and our rituals is so that there's a certain impermeable membrane between us and others. If they recognize that, it's because we have engineered it on some level. We want to be somewhat unable to mix in with the nations. Afilu ksherotzin b'chach. Even if you want to. I can imagine a Hasidic Rebbe, telling young children in the community who are aching to go off into the big cities, into Warsaw and Krakow and whatever, and mix in amongst the Poles. And the Rebbe saying, no matter how much you cut your payas and dress like them and try to talk like them and be like them, you're not going to be like them. And we might say, look how good we are at being modern Angelinos, right? And the question is, what is the cost of that? What is the way in which the Sfat Emet's excoriation of or description of the inability of the Jew to mix in with others was a certain recipe for protecting the Jewishness that is so much of a treasure to us. Kemo sheshemen zayit eino yachol mitiv'o utchanato litarev b'shar mishkaot. In that way, there's no better fruit to compare us to than an olive, because just like the oil of an olive, and as you said before, any oil, but that's the oil par excellence that they knew. It cannot, from its very nature, from its very description, mix in with other liquids. Lachein, therefore, this goes back to what you said, Alan, prescriptive, descriptive. Katuv b'Torah, it says in the Torah, lo titchatein bam. What binyan, what form is the verb lehitchatein in? Hitpa'el, which means reflexive. Once you get into reflexive, it's hard to say that it's in imperative. It's hard to render a thou shalt or thou shalt not in a reflexive form. We normally translate it as thou shalt not marry them, but he says, velo tichatein. It doesn't say you may not marry them. It's you are not gonna be able to marry into them. It's a subtle difference. Not you may not, but you cannot on some level. There's no way in which you are going to be able to mitchatein bam, marry in with all of them and have it be smooth and okay. Ki al pi ofiam v'tivam, because just based on the nature, the quality of the Jewish people, einam yicholim lihit bolel, they are not able to assimilate. What's painfully ironic about the Sfat Emet saying that is, we've shown that we're actually very capable of assimilating. But maybe, and this is harsh, but I want to say it, maybe the ones who are capable of assimilating are the ones who are less immersed in the fully comprehensive way of living life as a Jew. Maybe if you come to Shabbos Mincha every week, right? And maybe if you study Torah a lot, and maybe if your ways and your brachot before you eat are so darn Jewy, you will be resistant to assimilating. And if you're resistant to assimilating, it's not that you're going to feel someone saying, how dare you go out with someone who's not Jewish? You're going to say to yourself, how could I possibly share my life with someone who doesn't share this with me, however good of a person they are, right? It's a different message. So the Sfat Emet is not in some ways our primary under a source of wisdom for how to live as a modern Jew, but he's saying something that I think is worth pondering in terms of how much you cloak yourselves with the particulars of the Jewish people. Assimilation will not be a danger. It won't even be a possibility because there'll be no way for you to mix in. Hazivug eino ole yafeh. The match, and he's being punchy here because zivug here also means like the match between two people who want to marry each other. So it means the pairing off, but it also means like the relationship, the marriage will not work. On some level, that's all I want to say. But I was brought or attracted to this text because, first of all, now when I read the opening lines of Parshat Tetzaveh and I see the Israelites being asked to bring olive oil, which the later rabbis understood to be representing them, to be living on an entire level altogether, I think it's a healthy challenge to the modern, traditional, American, retro, involved and integrated, but resistant to assimilated Jewish experience. On some level, if you're connected with Beth Am in some meaningful way, you're already living a version of that life, right? You walk down the street, if you're not someone who wears a kippah all the time, for the most part, you're not that distinguishable from every Angelino in La Cienega. Other hand, the number of hours you spend in your week doing something like this, you are olive oiling yourself in a positive way, which means that the mixture in the society around you is just going to be harder to do. That's okay. That's what's going to make it so that 100 years from now, people are in this room, davening Shabbos Mincha, studying next week's Parsha, connected to the world around them, but even more connected to the Jewish experience in which they are living. May the next generation take that lesson very, very seriously. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to say Kaddish Rabbanan, and then we're going to do Birkat Hamazon. Let's do that first. Joe, you want to lead us? Okay. I'm going to give you a microphone. Okay. What page? 47 in the
newer book on
Kol Echad.
Shir Hamalot B'shuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kecholamim Az Yemale Sechok Pinu Ulshonenu Rina Az Yomeru Vagoyim Higdil Adonai Lasoti Mele Higdil Adonai Lasoti Manu Hayinu Semechim Shuva Adonai et Shavitenu Ka'afikim ba'negev Hazorim bedima Berina iktoru Haloch elechu vacho Nosei meshech hazara Bo yavo berina Nosei elumotab Tehilat Adonai Yedaber Pi Vivarech Kol Basar Shim Kuchel Elam Va'ed Va'anachnu Nivarech Yah Me'ata V'yad Elam Hallelujah Hodu Adonai Ki Tov Ki Le'olam Chasto Mi Amalel Gevurot Adonai Yashmiya Kol Tehilato Chavi Rein Avarech.
Yehi Shem Adonai Me'atavi Adolam.
Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach Me'atavi Adolam. Birshut Chavi Rai. Nevrech Alinu Shech Al Numi Shalov.
Baruch Eloheinu Shalom Yishalov Tuvo Chayinu.
Baruch Alinu Shech Al Numi Shalov Tuvo Chayinu. Baruch Haruch Shemo. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Hazan et haolam kulo betuvo bechein bechesed uvrachamim hu notein lechem lechol basar ki leolam chasdo uvtuvo hagadol tamid lechasar lanu ve'ayechsar lanu ma'azon leolam va'ed ba'avur shemo hagadol ki welzan umfarnes lakol Umeitiv lakol, umechin mazon, lechol beriotav, asher bara, baruch atah Adonai, hazan et hakol.
In just a minute, we're going to continue with Kaddish Rabbanan. It's on page 111 in the Lev Shalem before we go into Mariv. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'almad yivrach Hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam ne'amel maya. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal Shemei Kedusha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran v'alama v'yimeru Amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon v'al kol Tamidei Tamidehon v'al kol man da'askin v'oraita di v'yatra hadain v'di b'chol atar v'atar Yehei lahon l'chon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin umzona revicha u'forkana min kodam avahondi v'shmaya v'yimru Amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya v'chaim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Aseh shalom u'amav u'vrachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Mariv on page 264. After which you may be seated. After Baruch, you may be seated. V'hurachum yechaper bon v'lo yashkiv bala shiva po v'lekol chamato Adonai Oshim melech yi'anenu v'yom koreinu. Baruch hu et Adonai hamborah. Baruch Adonai barach le'olam v'ed. Baruch Adonai malcham asher b'olam. Umav yomi may be light, umav dir ben ubein leila, and night's fortune melchai v'kayam tamidim lo chaleinu le'olam v'ed. Baruch ata Adonai hamari v'aravim. V'yavarcha tasir mimenu li'olamim baruch ata Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. V'lo ta'tu ruach ha'eloah. Adonai Elohechem emeh b'emunah kazov v'kayam aleinu ki yihu Adonai Eloheinu. U'malchuto ratzon kibu lehem Moshe v'nei Yisrael lachanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chula mi chamocha b'alim Adonai mi kamocha nadar b'kodesh norati lo sefer malchutacha ra'u b'necha bokeya yam lifnei Moshe ze elianu v'yamru Adonai imloch le'olam ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו שמיים מלכנו. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום יתה ביד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד. ברוך אדוני עולם ימים ברוך אדוני מציון. הושיענו בנו. אשר כי המלכות שלך היא ולעולם עד תמלך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד בעל כל מעשיו. יתגדל יקדש שמי רבה, ימד יברך וטבע ונכמה וטבע חיי חונה וימכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמרה מבורך לעולם ומעמי יברך וישתבח ויתפאר שמה ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ותהלל שכינה קדושה בריחו ויהי לעמים כל ברכתה ושירתה ושבתה ונחמתה דמירן ביעלמה ויאמרו amen. The Amidah said in a quiet whisper beginning 270. Chatzi Kaddish 279. Yitkadav Yikadash Shemir Rabba. Yamadi Rakuteva Michla Wateba Chayachona Vimachona Vchedacho Beis Rabagla Bizman Kari Vim Ruame. Yehesh Mara Morach. Lealam, Lealmea Mayai Barach Vishtabach Vid Parchman Binase Vitadar Vitalev Delashkan Kudasharihu. Leela Min Kobra Katavish Yatatu Tavanechamata. Damirami Alamavi Ruame. May be seated, middle of 279. Vino Mananailo Alena Masedena Konalena Masaya Denuko Nanehu Yoshi Besetel Yomansel Shadayulana Marla Naimaxent. Elio and Samte Monecha Lo Tunel Lecharav Negali Rablo. Ukraini bene limo enochi v'tzara chaltzev yachab teyorachim mimas biyehu v'yarei b'shuati orach yamim as biyehu v'yareu b'yeshuati. Back to 216, second paragraph. V'yata kadosh yoshev tilo Yisrael v'kar ze'el zev yamar kadosh 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 nais v'chavod kadish le'olam l'nele. Batisa eini ruach v'ashma acharai kol rash gadol baruch v'adonai mimkomo Adonai mloch le'olam v'en. Adonai Sfaraman Mishkam Lero Anazar. Yirat Salma Fenechan Eloheinu Levatenu Shishmur Hokev Lama Zevin is Kevin Heaven Rabbi. Lamani Zamracha Vavalo Idamar Naila. Birchu Barna Adayad Kivin Nice. Yivtuchu v'chayedesh shemecha kilo azar dadar shechar nine lachav hetzlaman sitko yagdil Torah v'yadir yitkadav yigadash meraba b'yamadi rachar teva michma v'teva chayachona v'yamechon v'chaytachol be'eshav v'glav izman kariv yimru amein yehesh merav v'vorach le'olam le'amei amayai barach v'ishtabach v'yidparchman v'yidnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shena kudusha brichu le'yelam yinkol v'chadav v'shir taj v'davanech mata damiram b'yamav yimru amein tikabel sotan v'aton dachol be'Yisrael kodam avhondi v'shmaya v'yimru amein yehesh lamarav min Shemai v'chaim alena v'koy shavim ru amen. Oseh shalom v'ramav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru amen. Aleinu 281. Aleinu l'shabech l'Adonai kol ha'teikru l'aylo sirji v'chol ha'chaim yeh. Al kenekar v'lachadonai Eloheinu li'ot mehi v'arber divrei zechot ha'keilu. Kakadu et Torah lam loch lam even emar vayadonai lam loch kol haaretz bayom hahu yadonai echad u'shemo echad kadisha tom mornas kaddish yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabah v'almad yivrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'yimru amen yehei shemei rabah mevorach le'olam le'almei maya Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei kudusha brichu Eila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'yimru amen Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen Oseh shalom v'ramav v'yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. We'll do Havdalah. If you want to bring the sources home, you can. If you're not, please put them in a pile. I forgot to remove God's name from one of the sources. I want to put them in the Geniza. Okay. I know, but in one of the English translations, I forgot. I took it from Safari, and the English translation kept you hey but they in the spot.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Do you want to hold the candle?
Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei yorei ha'ei. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ha'givon kodesh v'olam l'choshev ben Yisrael l'mim yom ha'shvi l'shesh yimei ha'maseh. Baruch atah Adonai ha'mavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Amen. Ha'mavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Ha'joteinu Bechaspeinu yarbe yarbe kacho beka kochavim balayla. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi. B'mehera yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David. B'mehera yavo Eleinu, Mashiach ben David. Shavua Tov, have a good week. Find a way to be olive oil unapologetically. Have a good week.
Exactly, I always have olive oil in my food.
The other thing about oil and water not mixing, that's why the city's about to pour that stuff down the drain.
Shavua Tov, Table.
You too, AJ. Were you in the? Oh, sorry. Go on.
Go ahead. Sorry.
You'll see, I sent you an email because I was in the waiting room for so long, and I wondered what was going on.
I never found out what was going on. I just happened to, be parallel processing something because, it's after Shabbos here. So,
Right. That's why I emailed you as opposed to emailing anyone else.
Yeah, I don't know what was the issue there, but oh yeah, I see it. Jonina Duker.
Yep.
Yeah.
And because on the live stream too, it hadn't started. I don't like the live stream the same way because can't participate. But I kept looking and that hadn't started either. Anyway.
Yeah, I checked both of them and it hadn't. Yeah. Hi, Gary.
Hello, Shavua Tov, Gary. Is Marlise there too? Is Marlise there too? I don't think he can hear us, but.
Gary, can you hear us? No, I don't think he can.
And thank you for that microphone thing, because since I asked once, I didn't want to interrupt him again because it got better and then it got worse.
He raised his voice up, which picked up on the other mic. So that worked, except I see now how they have the mics positioned.
And he also, I think, moved it closer to him, but you were so right about the paper. Oh, there's Marlise. Yay.
Hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Diane. Hey, is Michelle there?
What?
Is Michelle Wolf there? I heard Danny.
Left with Danny. She had to go to sleep.
Okay. Tell her I said hi. Tell Danny
Okay.
I said hi.
Okay. Will
Look
do.
forward to seeing you guys in a few weeks.
Yes, yes, no, it's coming up. Looking forward.
Uh,
You guys both have a good week.
Kuboto.
Later.
Will you be back in California for Pesach?
No, I
Adrian?
will be here for Pesach.
Ah.
And but